Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to you all. My name is Carlo Carrascoso and I'm the director of the Banta Center for Business Ethics and Society. And I would like to welcome you all to tonight's talk by our distinguished guest. Before I proceed, I would like to acknowledge the following people. First, to the benefactors, the members of Central Administration, and our Dean's Office for their continued support for a deeper understanding of ethics in our professional and personal lives. I would also like to acknowledge all the faculty members here, and I can see many people here. Thank you very much for your presence and for your support of all the center's activities. And I would especially like to thank all the staff who are here for helping organize and run this particular event. The Banta Center for Business Ethics and Society, the sponsor for this event, is the university's forum for conversation, inquiry, and debate on ethics and leadership, as the foundation for excellence in individual and organizational decision-making. Our programs recognize the importance of ethical thinking and behavior for a healthy and successful professional life. Through our lecture series, we bring together scholars, practitioners, and students from diverse disciplines to discuss how ethics can be best practiced in the communities that we belong to. And tonight, we have a very special guest. I would now like to call Dean Tom Horan, the Dean of the Redlands Business School and holder of the H. Jess and Donna Colton Senecal Endowed Dean's Chair, to introduce our guest. Thank you.
Okay. Greetings and good evening. Thank you for coming out this evening to hear about the neuroscience of trust with our special guest, Paul Zak. Just before I go into it, I'd be curious, how many of you are from the University of Redlands community? Great, thank you for coming. How many are from the outside community around? Thank you for coming. Glad we've been able to reach out and attract a broader audience for what is an important talk and certainly will be a very interesting talk. As Carlo noted, it's quite appropriate to nest this talk within the context of the Banta Center, which is focused on business, ethics, and society. And certainly ever since Paul wrote The Moral Molecule in 2012, he has been looking at how trust affects businesses, relationships, and society. And so trust is a cornerstone, and he has been zeroing in on it with perfection, I'll say, for many years, and now with his latest book, zeroes in on what does it mean for high-performance organizations. The book, since it's come out, has been enthusiastically received, including recently winning the Harvard Business Review Bennis Award for Best Paper in Leadership. So he's on a roll. Central to Paul's argument, as you may know, is oxytocin, the moral molecule. Before Paul comes on to talk about this, I would like to add a quick story about the moral molecule. I've known Paul for 25 years. We started at Claremont Graduate University when I was there, I think same year, 1995. And so collaborated a lot, conversed a lot, did favors for each other a lot. And on one occasion, I had done something, and he came in and very nicely had a little a vial of oxytocin on a plaque that he gave me as a thank you. And so that was great. I didn't try and drink it, but I saved it. And so when I was moving from Claremont to here, I put all my stuff in my son's bedroom because he's in school on the East Coast, and he came back for a weekend, and I tried to move stuff out. I didn't get it all out. So he comes in at night. The next morning, he comes walking up to the kitchen table and looks at me seriously and pulls a vial out and goes, "Dad?" He thought it was the other oxy. And I said, "Fear not, my friend. It's oxytocin. It'll make you trust me." And so I have valued that vial ever since. So anyways, back to Paul's being here. We are delighted that he's here, that he's been with us as a visiting scholar during his sabbatical from Claremont Graduate University, where he's a professor of economics, psychology, and management. And we've had some great conversations. It's been nice for him to meet some of the colleagues here and so on. One other aspect which makes it very appropriate is at the School of Business, we've been honing in on what are the 21st century business skills that professionals need and how can we accomplish that in our education. And we look at leadership, teamwork, the ability to behave ethically. And so many of those things have their roots in the kind of work that Paul has been doing, and the writing he's been doing, and certainly in the speaking that he's been doing. So I think we've very much benefited from that. So I will say this. How many academics can I say the following statement about? Paul's work has informed academia, businesses, leaders, and even lovers. Not too many professors achieve that accomplishment. And tonight, Paul's insights will inspire us. Please join me in welcoming Paul Zak.
Good evening, welcome. Leverage is one of the most amazing discoveries of the ancient world. Right? When you have a lever, you push a little bit and you get a lot of output. So within organizations, we're always looking for leverage. We find that leverage in many places. Optimizing the supply chain, improving the way we treat customers, marketing. These are all leverage points that allow organizations to grow and to sustain profits over time. My focus in life has been looking at leverage in how we organize human beings. Right? At its core, organizations use human beings to create value, but also to improve the lives of their customers. Right? The only reason you are taking some good or service that you're paying for is because it improves your life in some way. And it's humans that are doing that. And as you know, there are many examples of organizations that have very toxic cultures. Go through the list of companies that went bankrupt in the last recession. Enron stands out immediately, right? Very toxic place. So I wanted to flip that question on its head. What creates a culture that is engaging, that is powerful, that sustains high performance? What part of cultures do that? So I want to tell you a little about this journey. I want to focus a lot on practical applications, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So if anything is making you unhappy or if I'm unclear, bottle it up for 45 minutes and then you can explode it at me when you're done. Okay, so, and thank you to all my dear friends who are here and spending their evening with me. So many of you I recognize, and it's an honor to have you spend time with me, so thank you. Okay, so how do you figure out what the role of culture is? Culture is this giant, massive boulder that I don't know how to break. So we've got to take slices of that, right? I want to take a very clear slice. And one of the slices I started working on about 15, 18 years ago was on trust, right? So interpersonal trust is how we interact with each other. And culture is the aggregation of the way people interact. It's the norms of behavior. So giant aspect, let me take one part of that and see if it matters. So how do you find out if this matters? The first thing is to look for mechanisms, look for pathways through which things like trust, things like culture, impact the way people interact with each other and therefore affect performance. So I built mathematical models. Let's just find ways in which trust may resolve some issues that organizations have. So I'm not going to interpret this for you, but in short, those two equations with long derivations show that trust does two things. One is it reduces the frictions that normally occur when humans interact. I know, big surprise, sometimes when you're at work, you have a little bit of friction. That's normal. So when you have trust in someone, you can rely on them to follow through and do what they're supposed to do. You don't need to monitor them as much. And so economists call this transaction cost. That friction is a little cost you have to pay to get something done. Trust reduces that transaction cost, acts as a kind of lubricant. The second equation is, in some sense, more interesting. It says that when you're in a high trust culture, you are less likely to have someone not follow through on their promise, defect on that promise to you, right? So Mara and I decide we're going to do a project together. If I trust her, right, I don't have to keep following up every third day, fourth day, fifth day, thank you, right? You're going to follow through because you're a follow-through person, and I trust you, right? So again, trust is not perfect, right? I don't need to follow through, 100% of the time, but 95 would be pretty nice, right? So I would call that a high trust relationship. So if that's the case, then I can focus on my part of work, right? I don't have to spend all that time. So two effects, reducing frictions and reducing the risk of a kind of default in what's going on. We tested this model against data from countries because actually there's data on trust within different countries, mostly in the developed world, some in the developing world. And when we tested this and lots of implications of this model, we found that trust was actually one of the most powerful factors economists have ever found to understand why some countries have high living standards and other countries have low living standards. In other words, when trust is high, there are more social interactions, which lead to more economic transactions, which stimulate the development of incomes. When that doesn't happen, pick off your favorite country that's not developing very well. The really bad ones are obvious, but countries like Colombia, where I was recently, it's a very low trust culture. So who would I interact with? I want to interact with someone I know, right? So that's great, except my circle is small, right? So if I have a high trust culture, if I can build trust, and that's what this paper did, was find the foundations of that, the extent of my market is bigger, right? I can engage in more interactions. Okay, so wonderful. So we published this paper and it has an impact. The World Bank starts implementing this. Great, but inevitably I got this question, which was, for two people in a given environment, why do they ever trust each other? And at first, I said, well, I can tell you what kind of environments produce high trust, why Norway has a very high trust culture, and why Colombia has a low one. Then that problem started bothering me. And my background's in biology and neuroscience, as well as in economics, and I thought, maybe there's a signal. Maybe somehow I see Mara and I go, I don't know, seems like someone I can work with. How does that happen? Well, it turns out in animals, there had been extensive research showing that a chemical that your brain makes, called oxytocin, signals that this person seems safe or this person seems trustworthy. Great. It happens in animals. It's just purely mammalian chemical. Must work in humans, right? And not so much, actually. Highly variable across different animal species. So a test was required. So we began designing a way to measure the brain's acute production of oxytocin in human brains. And in fact, not only measured this using an assay we developed by drawing blood, but we devised a way to shoot synthetic oxytocin into the human brain safely and show that we can actually cause people to be more trusting, to be more engaged. And actually, oxytocin increases our sense of empathy. So the reason that I'm better able to interact with my colleague is because I'm more emotionally in tune with her. I understand better what she wants, what I can do. I'm a more effective social creature. So across all the mammals, human beings are extraordinary in the number of oxytocin receptors they have in areas of the brain that essentially make it feel good to do good. When I interact with Mara and we have a nice outcome, I got a little response in my brain that goes, oh, yeah, the humans like this. They like it when you smile. They like it when you open the door for them. That keeps me embedded in the human community. Great. So that human community extends not only to our workplaces, our friends, our family, but it gets down to teamwork. And so as we did this work, everywhere we could, we asked, well, how does this work at the level of organizations, right? Could organizations actually measure and manage their cultures for high trust? I should say, that was a very grand statement. The truth of that statement is that companies started coming to my lab and going, we think trust is important, can you help us? And my first answer was, I don't know, right? And I'm a nerd and I draw a lot of blood for a living. I know some people with good veins, I can see you in the audience. So I said, yeah, we can come to your business and draw blood and we'll just see what the oxytocin levels are. And their faces would turn white and oh, no, I can't do that. So we began a long study, first in my laboratory, and then we had some businesses, I'll tell you about in a minute, that did allow us to come in, draw blood, and use other neuroscience techniques to measure brain activity while people worked. So not just college students in a lab, but real humans, I call it the free-roaming humans out in the world, measured what they're doing everywhere we could. So if the idea here is that if I want to understand what human beings are doing, what's driving behavior, right, that's essentially all coming from the brain. I'm responding to my environment for sure, but the brain is kind of the common currency that is going to tell me what's causing behavior. So let's measure brain activity directly. So if I want to make a case about a universal set of mechanisms that can be manipulated, that's a bad word, that can be influenced by leaders to create a high-trust workplace, let's see if we can find those in the level of the brain. So we began running these field experiments everywhere we could, including that last picture in the rainforest of Papua New Guinea. So why Papua New Guinea? Because if I want to make a claim for universality, I need to go as far away from the Western world as possible. I'm going to show you a movie clip of that in just a second. I happen to go with a Japanese film crew, so you're going to see actually what's happening. So why a film crew? Neuroscience is expensive, and I'm cheap, right? So when I have a film crew saying, hey, you know, we're doing this show on human evolution and social behaviors, we like your research, could you think up something fun and telegenic? And my response always is, first of all, I'm not an actor, I can't read lines, if I say something that's not true, I'll have some kind of twitch in my face, not good. But if you let me collect real data, I can enthusiastically talk about this on TV. So they said, well, you know, what kind of question have you really been worrying about? I'm worried about doing all my experiments in Europe and North America. I don't know how much this generalizes. So how far away from the Western world can we get? Papua New Guinea, as some of you know, is a small volcanic island. It's been inhabited for maybe 18,000 years. It's a rainforest. There are 800 distinct languages in Papua New Guinea. People live in these very small tribes. So I flew from LA to Japan to the capital of Papua New Guinea, Port Moresby, then took a little plane up to the Western Highlands, then took a four-wheel drive for hours out in the rainforest. Okay, permissions. Everyone got permissions. The Japanese government, Papua New Guinea, lots of permissions. Took a long time to get permission to do this. And we landed in this little village of 1,000 people without running water, without electricity, no bathrooms, and this is where I was for a week, embedded in with this tribe. So let me show you, I think, really the most audacious organizational science experiment ever done, right? Which is, does it really work everywhere? And it's in Japanese, so if you don't speak Japanese, we'll just take the volume down. So this tribe was interesting. They go to school to grade 1 or grade 2. They're subsistence farmers. They live far from markets, so there's no reason to grow excess food. Volcanic soil is very productive, and so they can grow whatever they want in about an hour a day to fulfill their caloric needs. So they do a lot of hanging out. They do a lot of traditional dances like this. They've been to markets. By the way, my cell phone worked there because it's an amazing little company that had cell towers all over Papua New Guinea, so I had a cell phone. And my chief of my village, because they adopted me, actually called me after I got back and asked me when I was coming back. So this is amazing. So this is a hand crank centrifuge. I'm going to be drawing blood. Built a medical hut with a generator. Oh, they put these flowers on this little thing. So the tarp is there because in the rainforest, when it rains, it's like machine gun fire knocking you down. So I look a little stressed, I think, too. Right? I'm kind of worried about this. A lot of things went wrong. I didn't want to tell you about it, but okay. So here we are. So we're going to take blood before and after. These men, all men, do a traditional ritual dance that they've done or their ancestors have done for hundreds and hundreds of years. These men have never been to a doctor or dentist and never seen their blood flow into a tube. It was really an amazing experience. This gentleman is a doctor who works in these villages, helping me. And what do we find? We find that in this ecologically valid setting, they're doing what they normally do. Indeed, even these individuals release oxytocin, their brains produce oxytocin when they do group activities, just like we found in the US, right? So this mechanism we're looking at seems to be fairly universal. So it's been tested lots of different ways. We started doing this research in the early 2000s, replicated by lots of different labs. So there's a very strong relationship between what the brain's doing and how we behave. In particular, social behaviors are driven by the brain's release of oxytocin that motivates us to interact with others, but in addition, because it increases our empathy, makes it more effective. We're better team members at some level. Great. So we began testing this in businesses, and kind of surprisingly, a bunch of businesses on this list actually allowed us to come in and run experiments on their employees. because they thought trust was really important. They thought there was leverage from being able to understand where trust comes from. So we ran all these experiments and then essentially came down to a set of principles that told us about policies that leaders could influence to create higher trust in their organizations, and then we followed those organizations to see if performance improved. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bunch of data at the end so that you think this is not just theory, but it really works in practice. So here's the kind of model that we've developed to think about how we influence cultures within organizations. So my research identified 8 foundations for organizational trust. Somehow, magically, they have the acronym oxytocin. I don't know how that happens. Good luck. So the idea here is that you can go into your organization, measure the foundations of trust, and then the ones that are low, you can push on them. You can push on one or more of those factors. That'll influence trust. When you combine that with a sense of purpose, why you're doing what you're doing at work, and I'll talk a little about what I mean by purpose in a moment. Trust and purpose. Trust tells me who I'm working with. Purpose tells me why I'm working on it. Now I have a focus. We find, in short, more engagement by employees, better customer service. The neuroscience makes an interesting prediction that when you work in a high-trust, high-purpose organization, your job will be enjoyable. And in fact, when we test that, we find that as well. And there's a positive feedback loop here. Now I enjoy what I'm doing, I do it better, and now my colleagues are happier, my customers are happier, so we see this kind of positive feedback loop reinforcing high-trust cultures. Okay, so I want to test each part of this and be clear on what the details are, what these factors are, and how to influence them. So here's the most important slide of today, which is this acronym that I developed. I'll talk about each of these factors. There is a test afterwards, so please take notes. And importantly, we developed a survey, a measurement tool, so we did not have to take blood from employees, and we could assess these factors by asking questions. And those questions are not questions about feelings or intentions, they're questions about actions. How do you interact with these individuals? When does this kind of thing happen? Right? So once we have this survey tool, then we actually can go broad. We can scale this across a lot of organizations, and we've done that, and it's been really fun for me as a lab rat to be able to go and work with organizations and affect hundreds or thousands of employees' lives. That's something that I never thought I'd get to do. So really exciting from a research and an application perspective. Okay, so let's go through these one by one just briefly, and I'll give you some examples. So the first O in oxytocin is for ovation. For each of these, I'm going to give you how much relationship there is between ovation, or each of the factors, and overall organizational trust. So that's for the nerds in the room. That's the explained variance, R squared for the statisticians. If I'm interested in leverage, if that number were close to 0, it means if I push on this factor, I don't get much on trust, which means I don't get much for performance. So you're going to have those numbers up there, which is from a nationally representative sample of working adults that we collected in mid-2017, so that, again, we keep the focus on leverage, right? I want to use the neuroscience to get the biggest impact on individual behavior and subsequent performance. Otherwise, I'm just guessing, right? So I've got to measure, and I've got to have a framework to know where to look. So the framework is neuroscience, the measurement tools the survey developed, and then I can go in and I'll review this at the end systematically. How do you go and evolve cultures for higher performance? And this is human science, right? This is about how we change the way humans interact with each other at work. So the first is ovation, and that's recognizing excellence, recognizing highest performers. So the MBA students in the room should go, gosh, this sounds like something I learned the first week here at University of Redlands in the business school. Recognition programs? Oh, that's not new. True, what's new is the neuroscience makes specific predictions on how to get the biggest impact from recognition. So in particular, from a brain perspective, recognition that is close in time to when a goal is met or exceeded, when it's unexpected, when it's personal, when it's tangible, when it comes from peers, has a much bigger imprint on the brain and subsequent behavior. So all this is about setting up feedback loops. So now my highest performer, Catherine's my highest performer, she has finished a big project, 3 months, her team worked really hard, they were sweating, and the next week's all-hands meeting, say, you know what, Catherine, you guys rocked it. Our client's so happy. They're thrilled. You hit the budget. Everything's great. Catherine loves coffee. And so I gave her a couple nice pounds of really good coffee and said, this is for you. You guys really are awesome. Let's talk about how you did this. So ovation is not just about celebrating something that's been done well. It's a chance to set up expectations for everybody else who's in the room that this is what we expect. We expect the highest performance from you. And we're going to share the information about how we do that. So tell us what happened. So I've done this for a long time. Whenever you have these debriefs with the team leader in a big meeting, they'll say, oh, well, we started doing this, and then guess what? My team member, Bob, solved this huge problem. We were working on this, we all had the data, and the servers are going down, and we thought we were screwed, and then Bob saved all the problem. They saved the data, and the data was saved. Okay, so all of a sudden, she's now recognizing the rest of her team. So I don't need to recognize every person on your team because she's going to do it anyway as a team leader, right? So now I'm sharing not only the upside, how we solve this difficult client problem, we're also sharing how we get out of bad situations, right? I want to talk about that. That's certainly valuable learning. I want to spread through the company. So if the servers go down and you're losing data, Bob's the guy you call, right? I want to know that. I want everyone to know that. That's super important. Okay, so recognition, very important. It's got to be close in time. If I wait 6 months, a year, from the brain's perspective, anything more than about a week is ancient history. It just didn't happen. So right away, lots of feedback loops, right? This is what we're doing. We're knocking it out of the park all the time. We're enjoying this. But again, recognizing that you can't always, at every meeting, if I give away a coffee, whatever, bag of coffee, that's not going to work. So you've got to mix it up. You've got to change it, right? So lots of people can be high performers. So let's move around a little bit, right? Let's think about this. But I don't want to move around to the Employee of the Month parking place at Kohl's and Citrus Plaza because everyone eventually gets it. That's not good either, right? So I really want to have set high standards. Let's work hard and reach those. And that, in fact, is the next component. So this component is called expectation. It's setting high goals. So it turns out that we like doing hard stuff. Our brain likes it if we have a trusted group of people around us and we have a safety net. So this is another crazy thing I did for a TV show, which was taking my blood before and after I went skydiving, right? With some crazy Danish dude, right? So why? Well, that's the ultimate sign of trust, right? 2 guys, 1 parachute, right? You got to be into it. So a couple things happened. First of all, I had a fear of heights before I did this. I was I think 45 when I first did that. Done it a bunch of times since then, but I had a real fear of heights because all tall people do. Our center of gravity's high, and I just didn't like it. But when the TV show pitched it to me, I'm like, oh, too perfect. And this is for the Morgan Freeman Through the Wormhole show on Discovery Channel. Morgan Freeman, come on! You can't say no to Morgan Freeman. You know that. So okay, it's a great gig. Yeah, that's a great example of trust. And what happened? I'm on the ground, I'm prepared, I'm having little panic attacks a couple of weeks before, but I'm going to do it. And there's a graduate student who's on the ground giving me some cognitive tests, adding 2-digit numbers, remembering things. I'm fine. I go up at 12,000 feet, and this student is giving me another test as I watch people disappear out of the back of this plane into the abyss. And I'm like, 14 plus 28, I have no idea, right? But I was totally focused on the task. So this Danish skydive instructor said, you need to do 3 things to get out of the plane safely, right? So you got to hold on to your parachute straps, you got to arch your back, and you got to pull your legs up. Because we're going out backwards, because, more telegenic for TV. So all I'm thinking about is 3 things not to die, 3 things not to die. So this is what I want to do at work. We want to set these high expectations so that just in case dear lovely Catherine was tempted to check Facebook or, read the news, she doesn't have time. She's focused on task. And the brain actually loves this hyper-focus, right? We're in task. We're not focused. We got it. And we have a team of people all doing this. We're supporting each other. Set those high expectations. Now, they're not always going to be fulfilled. We have to talk about what happens when you don't hit them. But set high goals, right? We love that, right? And work is an amazing place to actually have goals that we reach. Most people report that they have a greater sense of satisfaction at work than at play because you're hitting these goals and you're being recognized for them. So do that. Again, high correlation between expectation and overall trust. And find out what's happening, right? Create these challenges and then debrief. Step 1, ovation. Hey, we had this great challenge, we missed it. We went over budget, or we're delayed on our thing, our client's not happy. What happened there? Well, you know what? We're reaching for this. We got here. We thought we could do this. Let's talk about how we get there next time, right? So there's no perfection in the world, but if we set high expectations, you're going to get this kind of focus. So the worst thing to me ever in the world is when you go to some business and they're like reading the book, reading the phone. If you have time to read your phone, man, I don't need you working here. That's what I think, right? So you need to be on task. All right. Number 3, yield. This is taking advantage of the brains around you. So yield really is allowing people to choose how they execute projects. So once you've trained people, you want to give them some freedom on how they execute, because I want to hit high milestones, and high milestones I need innovation. If I always do it the same way we always did it, status quo, I get the average, right? But if I want innovation, I've got to let you do something differently. So I'll give you an example of that. We do a lot of blood draws in my lab. Many years ago, I set up the blood draw room. I like it this way, blah, 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 phlebotomist. Now my lab's big. I got 25, 30 people in there. They run experiments that I probably designed or funded, but I'm not there to run it because I have professionals, great graduate students and postdocs and staff. So they run experiments. I come back, the blood draw room's different. I'm like, what's this? You put a partition, now we got 2 chairs instead of 1. And they go, oh yeah, we realized that there was a bottleneck when we draw blood. We have to draw blood very fast because oxytocin has a short half-life, so we do really rapid phlebotomy. So yeah, so we were waiting there to roll up the sleeve, roll up the sleeve and put on the tourniquet, and we could have 2 graduate research assistants who were rolling up sleeve, get the tourniquet ready so the phlebotomist can just jab you with a needle. Smart. I didn't think of that. But these guys who are, I don't know, 27 years old go, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Everything, the whole thing slowed down. I want you to innovate, right? Don't ask my permission, try it. Now what's the flip side of that? You try to innovate, didn't work, that's fine, let's go back to the status quo, but yeah, you went for it. So if I'm creating a culture in which you try something and it doesn't work, and I scream at you, what does your brain say? Oh, I don't want that thing happening again, right? That obviously was the wrong thing to do. Let me stay under the radar and be quiet. So I have worked for some screamer bosses. Tom Horan. No, kidding. I've worked for some screamer bosses. No, Tom's never screaming. And I don't like it. I'm sure you guys, a lot of you have worked for that. And you just avoid them. And you're like, man, life is too short. I just don't need this. I got to look for a new job, right? So, and I certainly don't want to try anything new. God forbid. Right? So, again, if you train people extensively, then delegate generously. Give them a chance to try something new. You need constant feedback. From a supervision perspective, you'll see that trust is not unbounded. I'm not going to trust you and never talk to you for 2 years. I'm going to check in. I'm a big believer in the weekly all-hands meetings, and I love the daily stand-up huddle. Don't sit down. I want a 5-minute with you. And my 5-minute is, what happened yesterday? What's your plan today? What can I help you with? You stuck on something? Where are we going? Right? Do you know what to do today? Problems? Do you need resources? Can I fix something? No? Great. You want to talk this afternoon? Perfect. Go to work. If you're standing, then you don't get to sit around, eat donuts, whatever people do. So anyway, I'm a big believer in that daily check-in, right? So if you notice, this model very much is kind of an inverted pyramid, right? If I'm a leader, if I'm a supervisor, my job is to create the environment for other people to be successful, right? It's not about me looking good. It's about me going around and making sure you need all these parts. So, by the way, the book, which starts with the Papua New Guinea experiment, by the way, lots of deep examples. So I'm going at lightning speed and not breathing at all because I want to cover enough material so you guys kind of get a sense of this. So, wonderful places like the city of Seattle business license office was taken over by a former Microsoft executive. This is a place where it took something like 2 months and 80-some steps to get a business license. It's Seattle, okay, So what this guy did, he got rid of desks for supervisors. Number one, no more desks. You're moving. Number two, I'm going to make an intranet so you can see where that piece of paper is and where desk is at. So if there's a bottleneck, I'm going to know, right? It's on Bob's desk. Boom. Fine, talk to him. Then he'd open this up to the world. He said, you know what? The citizens are paying for this service, so they should see where their piece of paper was. And once they could see where it was, they eliminated a whole bunch of steps, and they went from 2 months to get a business license to a couple of days. Of course, right? Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Let's just find out what's going on. So again, someone had to innovate, and I'm sure at some point information got out, right? You have to fill those holes, but that's a huge innovation change. And part of it was getting supervisors off their butts and checking in. What do you need? Why we have a bottleneck? Hey, it's stuck here. What do you need? Oh, you need a piece of paper. Great, let's do that. Right. So I was at, say, another institution where I asked an administrator for some piece of information. I think enrollment. There's some enrollment information. And she's, and you know, I have a meeting in 2 weeks, and then, you know, that morning I said, where's the information? So I can't get it. I said, well, you know, the lady in the office next to you has that. And, oh, she won't give it to me. No, I'll walk her over there. I mean, you know, right. I shouldn't have to do that, right? You should know each other. Why? Because they didn't like each other, there was frictions, blah, blah. Anyway, eventually someone got fired and that problem was resolved. But, you know, as a supervisor, I need to know what that friction point is, right? If they can't trust each other, it's not going to go any further. Okay. Component T, I call this transfer. So transfer is really yield on steroids. So if I've created this environment where I'm giving you challenges, I'm training you extensively, and giving you a chance to execute as you see fit, the next evolution of that is, why am I assigning work to you at all? Right? Why not have you bid for the work you want to do? This is really enabling self-management, or job crafting is a term people use now. So we have this in my lab. We do funded research. It's expensive, and we get projects that come in, and what we do now is say, we got this great project that we're doing for Kauffman Foundation. Who's interested in this? Who has time? Who's got the expertise to do this? Who wants me to build a team around them? Or who wants to lead this project? So we identify what we call project leads. So every new funded project, there's a project lead, not always the senior person, by the way. We want to move it around so everyone gets experience. And then you set this up. You've got to do the paperwork. You've got to get it going. We build a team of people around you. I do the daily huddle, the weekly all-hands meeting, and we make sure that project is hitting milestones. If it's not, I'm going to rotate out that project lead, because now we're getting 2 weeks behind schedule, 3 weeks. So you know what? This ain't working. Let's get, what's your name? Colin. So Colin, now Colin's our new lead. He's a junior guy. All right. Why? Because he's been on a bunch of teams. He's seen how this works. I'm going to mentor him. Hey, Colin, we're making progress. Great. Keep moving. Right. So a lot of interesting companies, Riot Games in Orange County does this, where they rotate project leads, and it's kind of a downside to be a project lead, because you don't get to do the cool stuff, like the programming and checking with the clients, and right, you have to do all the administrative stuff and make sure people are doing their work. So that's great, move it around, right? If this is a kind of a servant leader model, then the lowest person on the totem pole is in fact the leader, right? Because you're doing all that spade work to keep this process moving. Particularly in the world we live in now, with virtual teams, right, highly diverse teams, people living in different time zones. If Mara wants to work from the beach in Italy and you get your work done, go for it. What do I care? And let's be clear about that. What about different timing, right? So she works best from, I don't know, 8 at night to 3 in the morning. If that works for you, no. Yeah. So if that works best for you, why am I, as long as you're communicating with your team, you're clear, you got to show up for some meetings for sure, but right, if that's what works for your schedule because you have kids or whatever, why do I care? Right? If I'm in a high trust environment, clocking in, clocking out, 8 to 5, who made 8 to 5 anyway? By the way, this whole system really is geared toward workers who can self-motivate, who are aware of what their goals are. There's got to be a lot of transparency. We'll talk about that from a leadership perspective in a moment. But you've got to enable, in the workforce we're in now, where there are few really high productive people, give them the tools, give them the perks to be able to be really productive. So again, you may want to live somewhere else. That's great. You work well with the team. You're a super valuable person. I want to keep you here, right? The last thing I want to do is constrain you to be in the office 8 to 5 because I need to see your face. Why? Because it makes me feel like I have control. I don't need that. I just need you hitting milestones. That's what I really want. Okay. All right. And I can fly you in once a month. I don't care. Okay. O is for openness. So one of the factors that we know from the laboratory research that inhibits the release of oxytocin is high levels of stress. So again, if I'm the screamer boss, if I'm just not clear about where our company's going, then what happens? The whispers at the water cooler, right? Did you hear? Are we getting sold? Am I laid off? Have you heard? Blah, blah. I don't want you focusing on that. Focus on your task, right? So from a leadership perspective, if I open up the books, then I get rid of all that crosstalk. And particularly in the world we live in now, with cell phones, social media, everything gets out for sure. So some companies have begun practicing what's been called radical openness, that is listing salaries, listing shares of stock. So there's a social media optimization company called Buffer that you can Google it, and they list the formula for the salaries. There are about 200 people working there, salaries, everybody by name. There's different levels. If you live in New York or London, you get paid a little more. So this gets rid of all the, and there's a couple, 2 or 3 salary levels. So high, medium, low. Entry level, medium guy, and that's it. And there's some bonuses at the end, I guess, but those are shared more or less equally. Now I don't have to have that whisper. What's David making? Did you hear? He got a raise? I didn't get a raise. Did he get a raise? Again, I don't want your focus on that. I want you to focus on these really hard to reach but challenging goals that are going to be invigorating, and focus on that, not on other stuff. All right, so again, highly related to trust. All right, 3 more. Third to last component is C for caring. So for some reason, not at University of Redlands Business School, but some other business schools, there is a sense in which once you get your MBA, you are some kind of, I don't know, automaton, emotionless person. Don't fraternize with the employees, right? They won't respect you. So our brains are built to form relationships. It's inevitable. We know from work by Gallup for many, many years that one of the most important factors to retain people at work is having a best friend at work. We're going to form relationships. Look, it's my lab. I don't have to tell you that, right? But I want to form relationships with you. I want to be clear that if I care about you, if I know something about you, then we're going to work more effectively, right? I've built this relationship. Doesn't mean we can't hit goals, and it doesn't mean if you're missing your goals all the time that we're going to have a really uncomfortable conversation. So I talk a little book about firing well. So my goal when I fire somebody, which is many, many people, is that you take me to lunch afterwards, right? Because I've worked with you for so long. We hired you, we thought it's going to be great, you're trained, you've tried, you keep missing your goals. It's frustrating for you. And often when I have these discussions with people, their shoulders drop. I go, oh yeah, I'm done. I just can't do this. As long as you're trying hard. If you're not trying or you're stealing, that's easy. You just go. But if you're trying hard, which wasn't a good fit, I'll use my network. I'll try to help you get a job, right? This just wasn't the right place for you, wasn't the right time. Who knows? You're not a bad person. And by the way, if you get another job somewhere else, now I got a person there. So one of my great graduate students a couple years ago works at Facebook. Guess what? I got a person in Facebook, and I call her up, and I worked hard to get her that job. And when I have other alums out of my lab, I call her up. Hey, could you talk to this person? Very interesting. Could be a good hire at Facebook. Okay, good. Right? So all those valuable people are important. Let's keep them in our network. All right. So we can intentionally build relationships with people at work without losing the focus on what the goals are or who's in charge. So here's an easy way to do that. First practical thing. So instead of walking work and going, hi David, how are you? I'm good, how are you? Just articulate the emotion you see in that person. Hi David, you look, fill in the blank. Happy, sad, tired, anxious, worried. What's going on? Now that's a whole different conversation, right? So I had a recent PhD from my lab, was in my lab for 8 years because she was slow on the dissertation, named Beth. And one day years ago, she came into the lab and she was like walking on air. And I'm like, what happened? They're all graduate students, I'm all trying to get them married and make babies. So I'm like, are you in love? What happened? You're so happy. She goes, you know what? I started running about 3 months ago with my sister. I've lost 15 pounds. I'm going to do my first 10K in a couple weeks. I've never felt better. I'm like, you're just lit up. I mean, you just look fabulous. Many times she's now told me just that 30 seconds of recognizing that I was having a great day meant so much to me, right? Because I'm focusing on you as a human being. I'm building a relationship, right? And what did she say when she got her PhD? I want to work with you the rest of my life. Oh, is she engaged? Is she really working hard for our goals? Sure, right? Now, she's really smart, and I would hire her in a second anyway, and she's still working in my lab, by the way, so, no problems. But you can form those relationships, right? I still have to write her paycheck. She's aware, right? It's not like she doesn't know. All right. Second to last, I is for invest. So if you're following this system, then it may be clear to you that the annual review is a bad idea. If I'm waiting a year to give you feedback from a brain perspective, irrelevant and a stressor, actually. Supervisors don't like it, employees don't like it. So if I'm giving you constant feedback every day, every week, making milestones, celebrating victories, right? Having fun, making this a great time, then I can use that annual review as a chance to look forward. So we repurpose the annual review into something I call the whole person review. So now I can sit down once a year and talk about where you want to be in the future in 3 dimensions. The first is professionally. What are your professional goals? How are we helping you reach those goals? I like to use the provocative question, what do you want your next job to be? Well, that's interesting. And maybe you say, I want my next job to be at Facebook. I really think that's the place for me. From my perspective, I want to help you do that. How do we help you get there? Because I want a person in Planet and Facebook, and maybe you work there 3 years and come back to me with new training that I didn't pay for. Love that, right? Because there's a small group of really awesome people from my organization. So let's have that discussion. So I had a secretary at Claremont for about 23 years, Gwen Williams, Tom knows her. And every year I would ask her this question, what do you want to do? Are you bored to tears in this job? And she said, leave me alone. I want to retire in this job. I'm like, okay, I just want to make sure that you are not so blunted at this job that you just want to go to a different department or do accounting or I don't know. Let's have that discussion. Much better to have that discussion than have her come in my office, ripping her hair out going, I got to quit. My husband wants to move to Chicago and his family lives there and I can't take it anymore. Let's talk about this. You want to live in Chicago? Awesome. We have an office in Chicago. Let's work on getting you there. You can still work with your team here in California, right? There are ways to do that. So I'd rather be ahead of that curve, right? So the first is professional growth. The second is personal growth. How's your family doing? How's your spouse? Do you have a good, really not work-life balance, work-life integration because you're working in the coffee shop, you're working at night maybe, right? How is that working? How is work affecting your personal life and vice versa? We shouldn't pretend that if your personal life is in shambles because you're working 1,000 hours a week, that that's not going to eventually catch up with you, right? So this is the long game. I want to be involved with you for the long game. If that's the case, I need to worry about what's happening professionally as well as personally, right? Otherwise, I'm not a very good leader. And the last part is what I call spiritual growth. And that can mean whatever you mean for you. For my former student, Beth, it was running. That's her spiritual practice. When we had this conversation years ago, she said, what I really want to do is come into the lab at 10 o'clock twice a week so I can run in the morning. Boom, done. She said, really? Yeah. As long as someone's here to answer the phone to 8, what do I care? You do all your work. You work at night, you work on weekends. I know, because I get emails from you, right? You want to run in the morning? Yeah, you should do that, right? Maybe sometimes we have an emergency or we need you in, but yeah, for sure, right? So again, if you're missing that component, whatever that avocation, volunteering your kid's school, whatever that is, let's make sure you have time for that, right? That you actually have a fulfilled life. Otherwise, you're thinking, why am I killing myself for these folks? Right? It's a good paycheck, but I have no life. Okay. All right, last component is really from a leadership perspective we call natural. So it turns out that people who are too perfect, too beautiful, we kind of hate, right? You know who you are in the audience, David. Anyway, if you, from a leadership perspective, I want to connect to people, right? I need to get all that emotional information. If you're not reading those emotions, you're losing out on a huge part of people's lives. So how do I do that? I let my emotions show, right? And the easy way to do that is to be vulnerable. To say, you know what? I don't know. So in my lab, here's a concrete example. My lab, we collect terabytes of data from the brain, right? Millisecond frequency, very nasty, noisy data. And we build models, predictive models of these. And we want to start using machine learning. I know the word machine learning, I've read 2 books on it. I don't know how to do it. But I got really smart graduate students that do. And so I said, look, you guys, we're going to build a team. I'm going to give you a couple of months. I'll pay you. Let's give you a giant data set and see if you can improve the prediction from these models using machine learning. They know I don't know how to do it, right? It's okay. And then they want to tell me all the details. Oh, we're going to use the support vector machines. I'm like, don't even tell me. And if it works, explain it to me later, right? You guys go work on it because you'll get expertise that I don't have. And I love that, right? You guys are super smart. Figure it out. And then present it to the whole group. They'll make it better. Let's harness all these brains to see if we can improve our output. If you can do that, it's awesome. I don't need to be expert in everything. And again, if I come off as a little demigod, you're going to start to hate me. No one wants that. We're all vulnerable. We all have strengths and weaknesses, right? So anyway, many examples in the book of great leaders who do things that don't lord their position over other people. So for example, You're leading a meeting. If you're the boss of this meeting, don't sit at the head of the table. Sit in the middle. Or ask someone else to lead the meeting. Why are you leading it? Just because you're the boss, right? So you know what? Catherine, why don't you lead the meeting today? Oh, that's great. She'll do something different than I will. Oh, we get some innovation. Oh, that's a good thing. If I was a really good leader, I could debrief with her after and go, you know what? Great meeting, you covered this and that. You know, you did cover this so well. So remember Bob asked that question about the backup of the servers and you didn't follow up? So the next meeting you run, which I hope will be soon, right? Little feedback, little coaching. So the goal of this is that if you're a leader, everything that your organization does runs perfectly when you're gone, right? This is such a well-oiled machine. People know their goals. They're so focused. They're not distracted that you can go away for 2 weeks, go to the French Riviera, and see movies or whatever you do in the French Riviera, and you don't have to check in, right? It's working fine. Or they have the good sense to call you if something really goes wrong. Hey, I know you're on vacation. We had kind of a little crisis here. Just want to let you know about it. This is what we're doing to handle it. Just thought you'd want to know. Oh, great. I can take a phone call. Right? Okay. So again, if you're going to yell at for that phone call, you're just going to cover up, right? It's a human behavior. Okay, so here's the punchline. If you take these 8 factors that are influenced by leaders, they explain 100% of the variation in organizational trust. So that is, we span the entire space of the kinds of factors that leaders can control to drive trust in an organization. So let's see how that affects performance. So again, this last thing I threw in the beginning was, if you combine trust with purpose, then you're going to get actually enjoyment at work. So what do I mean by purpose? So 2 kinds of purpose in organizations, at least 2. One is transactional purpose, how we do the process, very important. You've got to really optimize those processes. I'm talking about a different kind of purpose, which is what I call transcendent purpose. Why we're even here, right? I said in the beginning, at its core, this comes right out of Peter Drucker and Edwards Deming, at its core, every organization is improving people's lives. How each organization does that is different. So let's be clear on what we're doing that drives our purpose. Why are we here? Why are we even in business? Or nonprofit or government? What do we do that's so important in the world that people's lives would be worse off if we weren't here? And let's embrace that sense of purpose, right? So that purpose narrative is important to be part of the language of everyday speech. So some years ago, I visited LinkedIn, a very well-run company. We'll see what happens since Microsoft bought them, but at the time, very well-run. And every group I met with, when I say walked in on different meetings, and they said, LinkedIn's purpose is to make our members more productive and successful. Boom, they just said it every time, right? And the third time they said it, I said, how are you measuring that? And they said, oh, well, we measure success because we see the kind of job promotions that you get because everything's on LinkedIn. I said, how do you measure productivity? They said, well, we're not really sure about that. I'm like, okay, little work to do, but still, they knew this could be part of the DNA. Another example is the consulting company McKinsey did this really wonderful work where they looked in the archives and they looked at how many great events through history they were involved in. So the like the Yalta Agreement at the end of World War II, they were doing analysis for FDR. And the Iran hostage crisis, they were like feeding information like, how can we resolve this? So they started making these nice posters like, you know, if you heard about this in history, we were probably in the background helping out. Kind of cool, kind of motivating. That's a reason to exist. And they thought, you know, we went to the archives and found these. I bet our individual consultants have wonderful stories that, you know, really made an impact on people. So they built an app called 10,000 Stories, and they said, you know, when you got time, you got a little spare time, upload a story that, you know, you worked on a project and just really something amazing happened. And I thought, you know, 4 or 5 years, maybe we'll get 10,000 stories, kind of a big reach goal there. They got 10,000 stories in 4 months. Last I saw, they had 40,000 stories. So if you're at McKinsey and a little spare time, you're on the plane, you go, oh, wow, they worked on this thing that changed, you know, this person's life, this organization's life. That's kind of interesting. So that's part of our DNA of our company, right? That we are improving lives, right, at the bottom line. Okay, so let's go test all this stuff. So tests not done by me, some work out of the Wharton School showed that companies that are ranked as the best to work for based on surveys have much higher stock returns over long periods of time. So that's a good design. As I mentioned, we did this survey in mid-2017, and compared employees working in high trust versus low trust organizations using our survey, and then asked them a bunch of outcome measures to see, does it affect performance, multiply measured, right? I don't want one measure of performance, I want multiple measures. So comparing those in the highest quartile of trust, high trust companies, and lowest quartile of trust companies, we see less chronic stress, we see much more energy at work, greater productivity, you enjoy your job more, much more likely to stay in your job over the next year. By the way, I don't like the word engagement. I don't know what engagement means. I mean, I know the definition, but it's just overused. Energy at work is something that we found is really highly predictive of lots of good outcomes. And if you visit organizations like I do, like Tom does, you can kind of feel it, right? In the shoulders, right? Like, are they this? Or they're like, hey, how are you? Great to see you, right? So it's a different story. So I think that's a great question for people doing research. Greater job satisfaction, of course, because you like the people you work with, you trust them, you're doing great things with them. More innovation in experiments we've done in businesses. We give people tasks, innovative tasks to do. We can measure that. Sick days is a great one, right? So if you are being beat down, if you're not empowered to control your own life, you get sick more often, and or you're taking sick days to look for a different job. So either way, that's a nice indicator that something's good or bad. And lastly, something I really like, which is people work in high trust organizations are more satisfied with their life outside of work. Right? So they're better parents, they're better spouses, they're better citizens because they have something important in their lives they're doing at work, but they also have a time when they can shut that off. So very nice. Okay, here's the bottom line. We're going to apply the scientific method, which again comes out of Drucker, comes out of Deming, comes out of Six Sigma, right to cultures. So my view is that culture is like any other business process. It should be measured and managed for high performance. It's a continual process. So what do? We start with, here's an objective we want to hit. So we're recording this, so I can't tell you the name of the company, but a large company during the big recession that was bailed out by the US government, that might start with an A, had a problem with retention, right, for lots of reasons. And so it's, okay, we have a retention problem in this division. Great. Let's get data, and guess what was low in that division? The component invest. They weren't investing in these employees and they left. These are fresh faces. This is in Kansas City. So I went to University of Kansas. They got out of business school and they're all excited, and then they're on the phones taking phone calls when people had a really, really bad day, right? And that's all they saw in their future, and they quit. So they had 100% annual turnover. Great, why? I'm not investing in these people. And the guy who ran this division, they have to suppress this, but this big Texan, with a Texas name, he said, well, we don't invest in these people because they leave. Well, so maybe the causation's reversed, right? So let's try an intervention, which is, let's give you additional training in your first year. Let's give you a career ladder. Let's hire a career coach. We'll pay you to spend, say, half an hour a week, sign up for time with a career coach, talk to him or her about where you're going, be clear on, you work the phones for a year, year and a half, then you can move to something else in Kansas City, then you can move to the home office in New York, whatever. Let's talk about what that career path is, because you guys are valuable. So it takes about 100% salary to replace a professional employee that you lose. So if I'm paying you 100 grand, it takes me another 100 grand to find a guy to replace you who I'm going to lose in a year for 100 grand, right? That's not a good system. That's not an efficient system. That's a system that lacks leverage. Okay, so once we find that component, then let's clarify what we want to affect, in this case retention. Let's get a baseline, right? What factor in our culture may be influencing that? And then we're going to run what I call a management experiment. And I love the word experiment because I'm the leader, but I'm no God. I'm just going to try it. So I'm going to communicate to the people in my organization, hey, you know what? You guys are aware, we got this retention problem. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to implement these steps. It's an experiment. We're going to run this for 6 months, 8 months, a year. The data we've collected show actually within 3 months we see effects. Anyway, we're going to run this for 6 months, and then we'll remeasure, and we'll see what happens. If it helps retention, awesome. Then let's do another innovation to start improving, continue improving these different dimensions. If it doesn't, we can always go back to the status quo, get rid of the extra training, fire the career coach, whatever you're doing, but let's at least try it because we all know it's a problem. Everyone's aware. Every business I've worked with, they're aware of the problems, believe me, everyone knows. So we don't have to hide it. So use the survey. The survey is called O Factor, O for oxytocin, of course, and then give it a shot. If it works, keep it going. If it doesn't, go back to the status quo, okay? And then repeat. So here's your takeaway, which is couple things you can do on Monday at work. So at the end of each chapter of my book, there's an homage to Peter Drucker, who I served on the faculty with for 10 years at Claremont, a big influence on my own thinking. And Peter famously said, "Don't tell me what a great meeting you had, tell me what you're going to do differently on Monday." So every chapter ends with a Monday morning list, an homage to Peter. So here's a Monday morning list for you guys. So if you're the boss, you don't have all the ideas, start crowdsourcing ideas, right? You can make it fun, you can make it you can vote on it, you can have some prizes, but get more people to get involved. Use the brains in your business to get all the information you can. Second, celebrate victories, right? And the brain actually needs a refractory period after you've worked really hard. So you've worked really hard for 3 months on a project, buy tickets to Disneyland for the team, right? You know what? You guys are getting paid to go to Disneyland today. You knocked the ball out of the park, everyone's happy, go knock yourselves out. So the last thing you want to do from a leadership perspective is, if you worked really hard on a project and you end on Friday, on Monday I give you another huge project to work on, right? Let them decompress, get caught up on email, go home a little early, see your family, whatever you're doing, and then maybe Wednesday or Thursday, right, start with a big new project, right? If you're constantly beating people with this, then there's no time to recover, to understand what went right or wrong, and to take that learning into the next project. And lastly, something easy to do, which is a really simple snapshot of how our culture is working, is just survey people and ask, on a typical day, how much do you enjoy your job, 1 to 7? If you're getting 5s and 6s, pretty good. Getting 2s and 3s, you got some work to do, right? So then you got to dig in and find out, what is it about this place? What are we doing? And a lot of that is that we don't think about culture. We don't think about the leverage we can get from culture. We don't think about the human beings that are part of this culture. We're interacting with each other. When we start to think about human beings and business, when we start to think about business as a human endeavor, as human beings working together, which we're designed to do, nature made us group creatures, but create an environment where that can really be enjoyable, it can be challenging, it can be recognized for what it is, and you get to turn it off once in a while too. So if you do that, then you really hit the triple bottom line. This is great for employees, it's great for organizational performance, and it strengthens societies. So who can complain about that? Thank you so much for coming out, and thank you, University of Redlands, Dean Tom Horan. What a real pleasure. Thank you, guys.